The man who rode to the end of the line. If the person you loved most in the world forgot who you were, would you still show up for them every single day? This is the true story of Frank Morrison, a 75-year-old man who rode the same bus every morning for 12 years. Everyone thought they knew why. But they were wrong. What Frank was really doing would break your heart and put it back together again. This is his story. Chapter 1: The 915 bus. The Route 47 bus pulled up to the Oakwood Avenue stop at exactly 9:15 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 12 years. Marcus Johnson, the driver, had been running this route for 15 years. He knew every regular passenger by face, if not by name. He knew who got off at the hospital, who transferred downtown, who rode all the way to the end of the line. The hydraulic doors hissed open. "Morning, Frank." "Good morning, Marcus." Frank Morrison climbed the 3 steps slowly but steadily. 75 years old, ramrod straight posture, wearing his usual navy windbreaker and khaki pants. He carried a worn leather messenger bag that had probably been with him for decades. Frank swiped his senior transit card and walked to his seat. 3rd row, window side. The same seat every single day. Marcus pulled the bus back into traffic. Route 47 ran from the residential neighborhoods on the east side of town, through the commercial district, past the hospital and the community college, all the way out to the new developments on the western edge. 45 minutes, end to end. The bus made 23 stops along the way. And Frank Morrison rode it to the very last one. Every single day. Marcus had often wondered about it. Frank's house was right near the Oakwood stop, he knew that much. But the old man never got off until the end of the line, out. Past the shopping plaza, past the new condos, at the turnaround loop where Marcus took his break before heading back. "How was your weekend, Frank?" Marcus called back as they approached the next stop. "Quiet. Watched some baseball." "You?" "Took my grandson to the park. He's getting big, man. 3 years old already." "They grow up fast," Frank said, a hint of something wistful in his voice. A young mother with a stroller got on at Cedar Street. 2 teenagers climbed aboard at the high school stop, earbuds in, lost in their phones. An elderly woman with a shopping cart boarded at the grocery store. One by one, they all got off. At the hospital, at the college, at the shopping plaza. But Frank stayed on. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. Frank was looking out the window, like he always did. Not reading, not on a phone, just watching the world go by. What was he looking for out there? The bus rolled past strip malls and gas stations, past the big box stores and fast food restaurants that all looked the same in every American town. Then the landscape opened up a little. Some remaining farmland, not yet swallowed by development. A few old houses on big lots. And then, about 2 stops before the end of the line, something changed. Marcus could see it in the mirror. Frank's posture shifted. He leaned slightly toward the window, his gaze fixed on something specific. There, set back from the road, surrounded by carefully maintained lawns and flower beds, stood a 3-story brick building. Sunshine Meadows Assisted Living and Memory Care. Frank stared at that building every single day, particularly at the 3rd-floor windows on the east side. The bus passed it slowly. Frank's eyes never left those windows. Then the building disappeared from view, and Frank settled back in his seat. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath. 5 minutes later, they reached the end of the line. "End of the line, Frank," Marcus announced, though he didn't need to. "Thank you, Marcus. See you tomorrow. You know it. Have a good one." Frank stepped off the bus into the afternoon sun. He stood for a moment, adjusting his bag on his shoulder, then started walking. Back the way they'd come. Back toward home. It was a good 20-minute walk from here, maybe more. Uphill part of the way. Marcus watched him go, shaking his head slightly. In all these years he'd never asked. It seemed like the kind of thing a man didn't ask about. But damn, if he wasn't curious. Chapter 2: The Question. It was a Tuesday in late October, unseasonably warm. The leaves were turning gold and red, and there was something in the air that made people chattier than usual. Marcus had just picked up Frank at the usual time and place. "Beautiful day," Marcus said. "Sure is," Frank replied. They rode in companionable silence for a few stops. Then, at a red light, Marcus made a decision. "Frank, can I ask you something?" "Of course. I've been driving this route for 15 years. You've been riding it for at least 12 that I know of." "That's right. And you always go to the end of the line." "I do." Marcus chose his words carefully. "But I've noticed. Your stop is Oakwood, right? That's where you always board in the morning." "Yes, that's where I live." "So, why ride all the way to the end?" "That's a long walk back." Frank was quiet for a moment. Marcus worried he'd overstepped. Then Frank smiled, a gentle, slightly sad smile. "I like the exercise," he said. "Doctor says I should walk more. Keep the blood moving, you know." Yeah, I get that," Marcus said. But something about the answer didn't quite ring true. Or rather, it wasn't the whole truth. "Plus," Frank added, looking back out the window, "I like the route. Nice to see the town. See how things change." "That makes sense." But Marcus had seen the way Frank looked at that assisted living facility. That wasn't just a man watching scenery go by. That was a man looking for something. Or someone. Chapter 3: Frank and Sarah. The beginning. Frank Morrison came home from Vietnam in 1971. He was 24 years old and felt about 100. The flight from San Francisco to Chicago was full of other returning soldiers, most of them silent, staring at nothing. Frank pressed his forehead against the small airplane window and watched America pass beneath him. It looked so green, so peaceful, so utterly foreign after 18 months in the jungle. His mother met him at the airport. She hugged him so hard he thought his ribs might crack, and she cried the whole drive back to their house on the south side. "You're home," she kept saying. "You're finally home." But Frank didn't feel home. He didn't feel anything. The nightmares started the second week. The sounds, the smells, the faces of friends who didn't make it back. He'd wake up sweating, sometimes shouting, always with his heart trying to pound its way out of his chest. His mother suggested he talk to someone. The VA had counselors, she said. Frank went once and never went back. Instead, he got a job at a manufacturing plant. Steady work, decent pay, mind-numbing repetition. Perfect. On weekends, he'd go to Grant Park and just walk. sometimes for hours. The lake breeze helped. The sound of water helped. The anonymity of being one person among thousands helped. It was on one of these walks, in the spring of 1972, that everything changed. There was some kind of protest happening near the banned shell. Anti-war demonstrators, mostly young people, carrying signs and chanting. Frank usually avoided these things. He'd been called names at the airport, been spat on once. He understood their anger, even agreed with some of it, but he was tired of being the target. But this day he found himself drifting toward the crowd. A young woman was speaking through a megaphone. She had long brown hair, wore a simple dress and sandals, and spoke with a passion that cut through the noise. "We're not against the soldiers," she was saying. "We're against the war that sent them there. We're against a government that treats young men like chess pieces and discards them when they're damaged. Every person who came home from that war deserves our support, our care, our gratitude for surviving something we sent them into." Frank stopped walking. Someone in the crowd shouted, "What about the ones who volunteered?" The young woman didn't hesitate. "Then we owe them even more. Because they believed in something enough to risk everything, and we failed them by not being worthy of that belief." Frank felt something crack open inside his chest. After the rally dispersed, he found himself approaching her. She was picking up discarded flyers, putting them in a canvas bag. "Excuse me," he said. She looked up, and Frank saw the kindest eyes he'd ever seen. "Hi," she said, smiling. "Thanks for listening. I'm Frank. I just got back from over there." Her expression changed immediately. Not to pity, but to something deeper. Understanding, maybe. "I'm Sarah," she said. "Thank you for coming home." Those 5 words. Nobody else had said them to him. Not quite like that. "Would you?" Frank's mouth was dry. "Would you want to get some coffee maybe?" Sarah's smile widened. "I'd like that very much." They walked to a diner 3 blocks away and talked for 4 hours. Sarah was a nursing student at Northwestern. She'd grown up in a small town downstate, came to Chicago for school, got swept up in the anti-war movement through friends. She believed in peace, in justice, in the fundamental goodness of people even when they did terrible things. "People aren't the war," she said. "People are just people, trying to survive, trying to do what they think is right, trying to make it through." Frank told her things he'd never told anyone. About the fear, about the friends he'd lost, about how he couldn't sleep anymore because the nightmares were worse than being awake. Sarah listened. Really listened. Didn't offer empty platitudes or try to fix him. Just listened and let him talk. When they finally left the diner, the sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline orange and pink. "Can I see you again?" Frank asked. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't ask," Sarah said. They started seeing each other every weekend. Then twice a week. Then every day Sarah wasn't in class or clinical rotations. Frank felt himself slowly coming back to life. 6 months later, on a cool October evening, Frank took Sarah to the lakefront. The city lights reflected on the dark water. He got down on one knee on the concrete path, pulled out a small box with a ring he'd saved 3 months for. "I'm not good with words," he said. "And I'm probably going to have nightmares for the rest of my life. And I don't have much to offer except a whole lot of love, and a promise that I'll try my best every single day. But Sarah, will you marry me? Sarah was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, yes. They got married in a small ceremony at her parents' church downstate. Frank wore his only suit. Sarah wore a simple white dress. They had 20 people there, mostly family. It was the happiest day of Frank's life. Chapter 4: Building a Life. Frank and Sarah rented a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood on the northwest side. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people. The heating was iffy and the water pressure was worse, but it was theirs. Sarah finished her nursing degree and got a job at Chicago General Hospital. Frank got promoted to shift supervisor at the plant. Together, they made enough to get by. 2 years after they married, their son Michael was born. Frank held his son for the first time in the hospital delivery room and wept. Sarah, exhausted and radiant, smiled at him. "We made a person," she said in wonder. "We made a person," Frank echoed. Michael was a fussy baby, colicky and difficult. There were nights when Frank walked the apartment for hours, bouncing his son, singing old songs he half remembered from his childhood, while Sarah slept the few hours she could between nursing shifts. The nightmares had gotten better, but they hadn't disappeared. Sometimes Frank would wake up shouting, and Sarah would hold him until the shaking stopped. Michael learned early to sleep through his father's night terrors. "You're a good dad," Sarah would tell him. "The best dad." "I'm trying," Frank would say. "That's all anyone can do." 3 years later, their daughter Emily was born. Emily was the opposite of her brother. Calm, easy, happy. She smiled at everyone and everything. Frank adored her instantly and completely. "She's going to be trouble," Sarah said, watching Frank cradle their daughter. "She's already got you wrapped around her tiny finger." "Damn right," Frank said, not even trying to deny it. The years rolled on. Michael and Emily grew. The apartment got smaller. Frank's back started hurting from years at the plant. Sarah's shifts got longer as the hospital became more understaffed. But they were happy. They had Friday night dinners where everyone had to share one good thing and one hard thing from their week. They had camping trips to Wisconsin in the summer. They had Christmas mornings where the kids would wake them up at dawn, too excited to wait any longer. Michael grew into a serious, studious kid who wanted to be an engineer. Emily became a whirlwind of energy, involved in every activity, friends with everyone. Frank taught Michael how to fix cars. Sarah taught Emily how to bake. Together, they taught both kids about kindness, about integrity, about showing up even when it's hard. "Love isn't a feeling," Sarah would tell them. "Feelings come and go. Love is what you do. It's showing up. It's trying. It's choosing the other person even when it's difficult." Frank would watch her with the kids and fall in love with her all over again. When Michael left for college at the University of Illinois, Sarah cried for a week. "He's just downstate," Frank reminded her. 3 hours away. "I know," Sarah said. "But he's my baby." 4 years later, when Emily left for Northwestern, the house felt impossibly empty. Frank and Sarah would sit at dinner, just the two of them, and the silence felt strange after 25 years of chaos and noise. "So," Sarah said one night, "it's just us again." "Just us," Frank agreed. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I like us," she said. "Me too." They had 10 years of just us. 10 years of sleeping in on Sundays, of spontaneous road trips, of rediscovering each other without the constant demands of parenthood. Michael got married to a woman named Jennifer. Emily became a teacher and moved to Seattle. Grandchildren arrived, 3 of them, scattered across the country. Frank retired from the plant at 65. Sarah kept working because she loved nursing, finally cutting back to part-time at 68. They moved to a small house near the Route 47 bus line. One story easier on Frank's knees. A little yard where Sarah planted tomatoes and flowers. Life was good. Life was so good. And then it wasn't. Chapter 5: The Forgetting. It started small. Sarah would misplace her keys more often. She'd forget why she'd walked into a room. She'd tell Frank the same story twice in one day. "I'm just getting old," she'd laugh it off. But Frank noticed. He always noticed everything about Sarah. Then she forgot their grandson's name. Just for a moment, just a blip, but it happened. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered to Frank that night, scared. "Nothing's wrong with you," he said. "But maybe we should talk to your doctor. Just to be safe." The appointment started. The tests. The brain scans. The neurological exams. The memory assessments where Sarah had to repeat words and draw clocks and answer questions that got harder and harder. Frank sat in the corner of the examination room and watched his wife struggle to remember things she'd known her whole life. Drive. Chen, a neurologist at the university hospital, sat down with them in her office 3 weeks later. "I'm afraid it's Alzheimer's disease," she said gently. "Early stage, but progressing." Sarah's hand found Frank's. Squeezed hard. "How long?" Frank asked. "There's no way to know for certain. Everyone's different. We can start medication that might slow the progression, but there's no cure." Frank felt like he was back in Vietnam, listening to artillery in the distance, knowing it was coming closer but unable to do anything except wait. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, and her voice was small and scared in a way Frank had never heard before. "We fight," Frank said immediately. "We do everything we can." "Right, doctor." "Right, drive," Chen said. "We fight." They started the medications. They made lists and schedules and put labels on everything. Sarah wore a medical alert bracelet. Frank retired from his part-time job at the hardware store to be home more. For a while, it seemed okay. Manageable. But Alzheimer's doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't slow down out of kindness. Sarah started forgetting bigger things. She'd get confused about what year it was. She'd look at Frank sometimes with uncertainty in her eyes, like she knew she should know him but couldn't quite place him. "It's me, honey," he'd say. "It's Frank. Your husband." "Oh," she'd say, and relief would flood her face. "Of course. Frank. I don't know where my mind goes sometimes." The kids wanted to help. Michael offered to move back from Illinois. Emily flew home every month. "Dad, this is too much for you," Michael said. "There are places, good places, where Mom could get professional care. I can take care of her, Frank said. I know you can, Emily said gently. But should you have to? You're 72 years old, Dad. She took care of me, Frank said. When I came back from the war and I was broken into a million pieces, she put me back together. She loved me through it. I'm not giving up on her now. But the day came when Frank had to admit he couldn't do it alone anymore. He woke up at 3 in the morning to find Sarah gone. He searched the house in a panic, then the yard, then ran outside in his slippers to search the street. He found her 2 blocks away in her nightgown, crying. I can't find my way home, she sobbed. I just want to go home. I'm right here, Frank said, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. I've got you. Let's go home together. The next morning, Frank called Michael. I need to look at those places you mentioned, he said. Chapter 6 Sunshine Meadows. Sunshine Meadows Assisted Living and Memory Care was the 3rd facility they visited. The first 2 had felt institutional, cold, with that smell of industrial cleaning products trying to mask something worse. But Sunshine Meadows was different. It was smaller, more residential. The memory care unit was on the 3rd floor, secured but not prison-like. Large windows let in natural light. The rooms were private, personalized. The staff seemed genuinely warm. We focus on dignity, the director, Mrs. Patterson, explained as she showed them around. Memory loss is terrifying for our residents. We try to create an environment that feels safe, familiar, and as much like home as possible. Sarah was having a good day. She walked beside Frank, holding his hand, looking at everything with interest. What do you think, honey? Frank asked her. It's nice, Sarah said. Very nice. But I like our house. I know, sweetheart. Me too. Mrs. Patterson led them to a corner room on the 3rd floor. The window looked east, out over the grounds and toward the road. This would be Sarah's room, she said. Sarah walked to the window and looked out. You can see so far, she said. Frank stood beside her. Yes, you could see far. You could see the road. You could see the bus stops. Dad, Michael said quietly. What do you think? Frank looked at his son, then at Sarah standing in the sunlight, then at Mrs. Patterson's kind face. Can I bring her things from home? Pictures, her favorite blanket, stuff like that? Of course, Mrs. Patterson said. We encourage it. The more familiar objects, the better. And I can visit whenever I want. Every day, all day if you'd like. This is her home. Your family. Frank nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Okay. Sarah moved into Sunshine Meadows on a Tuesday in March, 5 years ago. Frank helped her unpack, hanging pictures on the walls, arranging her favorite things on the dresser, putting her clothes in the closet. Sarah watched, not quite understanding but trusting Frank. Are we staying here? She asked. You're staying here, honey, Frank said. Just for now. There are nice people here who will help you when I can't be around. But you'll come back. Frank's throat tightened. Every single day. I promise. Okay, Sarah said. I trust you, Frank. At least she still remembered his name. That wouldn't last much longer. Chapter 7 The Man in the Corner. Frank visited every day, just like he'd promised. At first, it was wonderful. Sarah would light up when he walked in. They'd sit by the window and talk, or Frank would read to her from her favorite books, or they'd watch the birds at the feeder outside. But gradually, inevitably, she started to slip away. She began introducing Frank to the nurses as a nice man who visits me. "Sarah, it's me," Frank would say gently. "It's Frank. Your husband." She'd look at him, confused. "I'm married. For 52 years. Oh." A pause. "You're very patient with me. It's easy to be patient with you." Then came the day that broke him. Frank walked into Sarah's room, called out his usual greeting. "Hi, sweetheart. It's me." Sarah looked up from her chair by the window. Her face was pleasant but blank. "Hello," she said politely. "Do I know you?" "It's Frank, honey. Your husband." Sarah's expression shifted to something like alarm. "I don't have a husband," she said, her voice rising. "Who are you? Why are you in my room?" A nurse came quickly, alerted by Sarah's distress. "It's okay, Sarah," the nurse said soothingly. "This is Frank. He's a friend. He comes to visit you." "I don't know him," Sarah said, pressing back in her chair. "I don't want him here." Frank felt like someone had reached into his chest and torn his heart out. "I'll go," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean to upset you." He walked out quickly, made it to the parking lot before the tears came. His phone rang. "Michael." "Hey, Dad. Just checking in. How's Mom today?" Frank couldn't answer. He just sat in his car and cried while his son said, "Dad? Dad, what's wrong?" That evening, Frank sat with Mrs. Patterson in her office. "She doesn't remember me," he said, "and seeing me upsets her. I'm so sorry, Mr. Morrison. This is one of the cruelest aspects of the disease." "What do I do?" Frank asked. "I promised I'd come every day. But if it hurts her..." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Some families find that stepping back from direct visits can be easier on everyone. You could still come to the facility, observe from a distance, make sure she's okay, but not interact directly. Frank looked out the window of the office. From here, you could see the Route 47 bus passing by. From a distance, he said slowly, "It's your choice, of course. But sometimes loving someone means figuring out what they need, not what we need." Frank nodded slowly. That night, he barely slept. He thought about Sarah, about all their years together, about promises made and promises kept. By morning, he had a plan. Chapter 8: The Route. The next day, Frank walked to Oakwood Avenue at 9:10 a.m. At 9:15, the Route 47 bus pulled up. "Morning, Frank," Marcus said, surprised. "Haven't seen you on the morning route before. You usually come by for the afternoon bus." "Change of schedule," Frank said. He took his usual seat. Third row, window side. The bus made its way through town. Frank watched the familiar landmarks slide past. The high school where Emily had graduated. The diner where he'd had his first date with Sarah. The park where they'd taken the kids every Sunday. And then, as they approached the newer developments on the west side of town, Frank sat up straighter. There it was. Sunshine Meadows. 3 stories, brick facade, flower beds out front. Frank's eyes went immediately to the third floor, east side, the corner room, and there in the window was Sarah. She was sitting in the chair they'd brought from home. The afternoon sun lit her white hair like a halo. She was looking out the window, her gaze distant, unfocused. But she was there. She was safe. She was okay. The bus passed the building. Frank watched until it disappeared from view. He rode to the end of the line, got off, thanked Marcus, and started the long walk home. The next morning at 9:15, he did it again. And the next day. And the next. It became his routine, his ritual, his way of keeping his promise. Every single morning, Frank rode the Route 47 bus. And every single morning, he looked for Sarah in that third-floor window. And almost every morning she was there. He couldn't hold her hand, couldn't hear her voice, couldn't tell her he loved her, but he could see her. He could make sure she was okay. He could show up. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Marcus never asked about it directly, but after that conversation, he seemed to understand. He'd slow down just a little as they passed Sunshine Meadows. He'd glance in the mirror, see Frank looking out the window, and give a small nod. "Nice day, Frank." "Sure is, Marcus." "Sure is." The seasons changed. Summer heat gave way to autumn colors, then winter snow, then spring blooms. And through it all, Frank rode the bus. On his 75th birthday, Michael and Jennifer and the grandkids came for dinner. "Dad," Michael said as they were cleaning up, "are you doing okay?" "Really okay? I'm fine, son. It's been 3 years since Mom went into memory care. Emily and I worry about you. You're alone in this house." "I'm not alone," Frank said. "I've got you kids. I've got my routines. I'm okay." But later that night, lying in bed in the room he'd shared with Sarah for 30 years, Frank wasn't so sure. The house was too quiet. The bed was too big. The world was too empty without her voice, her laugh, her presence. But every morning he got up. He had coffee. He walked to Oakwood Avenue. He rode the bus. Because that's what love was. Showing up. Chapter 9: The Empty Window. It was the first week of December, cold and gray. Frank walked to the bus stop at his usual time, breath misting in the air. His arthritis was acting up, making his knees ache, but he didn't care. "Morning, Frank," Marcus said. "Morning, Marcus." The bus was more crowded than usual. Holiday shopping season meant more people heading to the mall, the big box stores. Frank had to sit one row back from his usual spot, but the view was the same. They made their way west, past the familiar landmarks, past the commercial district, out toward the developments. Frank felt his pulse quicken as they approached Sunshine Meadows. He leaned toward the window. The building came into view. Frank looked up at the third floor, east corner. The window was there. The chair was there. But Sarah wasn't. Frank's breath caught. "It's okay," he told himself. "She's probably in the bathroom, or having breakfast, or in an activity room." But a cold dread settled in his stomach. The next morning he looked again. The chair was empty. And the morning after that. And the day after that. A week passed. The window stayed empty. Frank's hand started to shake on the bus. He couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Michael called on Sunday. "Hey, Dad. Want to come over for dinner?" "I can't," Frank said. "You okay? You sound off." "I'm fine, Dad." I said I'm fine, Michael. He hung up and immediately felt guilty. But he couldn't explain. Couldn't put into words the terror that was growing in him. Where was Sarah? 2 weeks. The window stayed empty. Frank wanted to call Sunshine Meadows, wanted to ask, wanted to demand answers. But he was afraid. If they told him something was wrong, that would make it real. If he didn't know, he could still hope. So he rode the bus and looked at the empty window, and felt a piece of himself die a little more each day. On a cold Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Sarah disappeared from the window, it started to rain. Not a gentle rain. A harsh, punishing winter rain that felt like ice. Frank stood at the Oakwood Avenue stop, water soaking through his jacket. "Jesus, Frank," Marcus said as he opened the doors. "Get in here. You're gonna catch pneumonia." Frank climbed on, water dripping from his clothes. "You should have stayed home, man. This weather's terrible." Frank didn't answer. He walked to his seat, sat down, looked out the rain-streaked window. The bus moved through the gray morning. They approached Sunshine Meadows. Frank looked up at the window. Still empty. Something broke inside him. For the first time in 12 years, Frank reached up and pulled the stop cord. The bell dinged. Marcus looked in the mirror, startled. "Frank, I need to get off here," Frank said. "You sure? You'll get soaked walking from here." "I'm sure." Marcus pulled the bus over at the Sunshine Meadows stop. The doors opened. "You okay, man?" Marcus asked, real concern in his voice. "I don't know," Frank said honestly. "I really don't know." He stepped off the bus into the freezing rain. Marcus watched him for a moment, then slowly pulled away. Frank stood there, water streaming down his face, staring at the building. Then he started walking toward the entrance. Chapter 10 The Truth. The lobby of Sunshine Meadows was warm and bright, a sharp contrast to the storm outside. Frank stood just inside the entrance, dripping water onto the tile floor. The receptionist looked up. "Oh my goodness, sir, you're soaked. Are you okay?" "I need..." Frank's voice cracked. "I need to see Mrs. Patterson, please." "Of course. Let me call her." "Your name?" "Frank Morrison." Recognition flashed across her face. "Mr. Morrison. Of course. One moment." She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, hung up. "She'll be right down." Frank stood there, shivering, trying to prepare himself for whatever he was about to hear. Mrs. Patterson appeared a minute later. Her face, when she saw him, was kind but sad. "Mr. Morrison," she said gently, "come with me. Let's get you dried off." She led him to her office, grabbed a towel from a closet, handed it to him. "Thank you," Frank said, patting at his face, his hair. "Please sit." Frank sat. His hands were shaking. Mrs. Patterson sat down across from him. She looked like she was choosing her words carefully. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have called you. We have you listed as next of kin, but somehow..." "I'm so sorry." The wall tilted. "She's gone," Frank said. Not a question. A statement. "Yes, Mrs. Patterson said softly. 5 days ago. It was peaceful. She went to sleep and just didn't wake up. 5 days. Sarah had been gone for 5 days, and he hadn't known. The service was yesterday, Mrs. Patterson continued. Your children arranged it. They said they tried to reach you. Frank thought of the phone calls he'd ignored. Michael, Emily, unknown numbers he'd let go to voicemail because he couldn't face whatever news they might bring. I didn't. Frank couldn't finish the sentence. Mr. Morrison, I know this is difficult, but I need to tell you something. About Sarah. About what we observed. Frank looked up. Every morning, Mrs. Patterson said, Sarah would go to that window. It was her routine. She'd sit there from about 9 o'clock until 10 or so, and she'd watch the road. Frank's throat constricted. We didn't know what she was looking for. She couldn't tell us. But she'd watch the buses go by, and sometimes she'd smile. Sometimes she'd lift her hand, like she was waving at someone. The tears came then, hot and fast, and Frank couldn't stop them. She didn't remember your name, Mrs. Patterson said. She didn't remember being married. She didn't remember her life. But some part of her, some deep part that the disease couldn't touch, remembered that someone was coming. That someone loved her. That she was supposed to watch and wait. Frank covered his face with his hands and wept. You showed up for her every single day, Mrs. Patterson said, her own voice thick with emotion. For 12 years. Even when she couldn't remember you. Even when it hurt. You showed up. I loved her, Frank said, the words broken. I love her. I know. And somehow, in the way that matters most, she knew it too. They sat in silence for a long moment, just the sound of Frank's quiet crying and the rain against the windows. Finally, Mrs. Patterson spoke again. We have her things. Your children wanted you to have them when you were ready. I can get them now, if you'd like. Frank nodded, wiping his eyes. Mrs. Patterson left the room and returned with a medium-sized box. Take your time, she said. I'll be at the front desk if you need anything. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Frank pulled the box toward him. His hands shook as he opened it. Sarah's favorite cardigan, the blue one she'd worn so many times he teased her about it. He pressed it to his face. It smelled like the lavender lotion she'd always used. Photos in frames. Their wedding day. The kids as babies. Holidays and birthdays and ordinary moments made extraordinary by being together. A book, worn and reread To Kill a Mockingbird, Sarah's favorite. And at the bottom, a small journal. Frank picked it up with trembling hands. Opened it. Sarah's handwriting filled the pages. Some entries were clear and detailed. Others were fragmentary, confused. Some were just the same sentence repeated over and over. Frank read from the beginning. March 15th. Moved into new place today. Frank says it's just for now. I trust Frank. March 20th. Had a good day. Frank visited. We sat by the window. April 2nd. Can't remember what I did yesterday. Scared. But Frank was here. Always here. The entries got shorter, more confused. May something. Not sure. Man visits. Kind face. Name is. Frank. Yes. Frank. Summer, I think. Sit by window. Something important outside. Can't remember what, but need to watch. Frank's tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink slightly. He turned to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible. It said can't remember much. Can't remember name. Can't remember place. But know this someone is coming. Someone loves me. Must watch and wait. Must keep watching. Frank closed the journal and pressed it to his chest. I came every day, he whispered to the empty room. Every single day, Sarah. I kept my promise. The rain continued outside, washing the world clean. Chapter 11. Going home. Frank sat in Mrs. Patterson's office for a long time. Eventually, he put the items back in the box, carefully, reverently. He stood up, legs stiff, and walked out to the reception area. The young woman at the desk looked up. Mr. Morrison, is there anything I can do for you? Could you call me a cab? I don't think I can walk home in this weather. Of course. While they waited, Frank looked around the lobby. There were photos on the walls. Residents participating in activities, smiling with visitors, celebrating birthdays. He spotted Sarah in one of them. It must have been from a few years ago. She was sitting at a table, doing some kind of craft project, wearing that blue cardigan. She was smiling. Frank stared at the photo. She was lovely, the receptionist said softly. She was, Frank agreed. She really was. The cab arrived. The driver helped Frank load the box into the trunk. As they pulled away from Sunshine Meadows, Frank looked back at the building. Up at the third floor, east corner window. The rain had lightened to a drizzle. A bit of afternoon sun broke through the clouds, and for just a moment, the window seemed to glow. Goodbye, Frank thought. I'll see you again someday. The cab dropped him at home. Frank paid, tipped extra because of the weather, and carried the box inside. The house was dark and cold. He hadn't left any lights on that morning. He set the box on the kitchen table and stood there, uncertain. The silence was overwhelming. Then his phone rang. Michael. Frank almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Dad. Dad, where have you been? I've been calling all week. We've all been worried sick. I know, Frank said. I'm sorry. Dad, I know about Mom. I know you just found out. Emily and we've been trying to reach you. The funeral was yesterday, and we wanted you there, but we couldn't find you, and Michael. Frank's voice was quiet but firm. I need to tell you something. About your mother. About the last 12 years. Okay, Michael said, clearly confused. Can you come over? You and Emily. Tomorrow maybe? We can come today, Dad. Right now. Tomorrow's better. I need tonight to process. A pause. Okay. Tomorrow. Noon. Thank you, son. Dad. Are you okay? No, Frank said honestly. But I will be. After they hung up, Frank unpacked the box again. He arranged the photos on the mantel. He draped Sarah's cardigan over the back of her favorite chair. He put the journal on the coffee table, where he could see it. Then he made himself dinner. Just soup from a can, but it was something. He sat in his chair, Sarah's chair empty beside him as it had been for years, and he talked to her. "I missed the funeral," he said. "I'm sorry about that. But I think you'd understand. I was looking for you. I'm always looking for you." The house didn't answer, but Frank felt a little less alone. "The kids are coming tomorrow. I'm going to tell them everything. About the bus. About watching you from the window. About how I showed up every day because I promised I would." He looked at her empty chair. "I kept my promise, Sarah. Right to the end. I hope you knew that. Somewhere in there, I hope you knew." That night, Frank slept better than he had in weeks. Chapter 12. The next stop. The next morning, Frank woke up at his usual time, 6:30 a.m. The rain had stopped during the night, and weak winter sunlight filtered through the curtains. He made coffee, showered, dressed. At 9:10, out of pure habit, he started to put on his coat. Then he stopped. He didn't need to go to the bus stop today. Sarah wasn't at the window anymore. The thought should have broken him, but instead, he felt something else. Not peace, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of peace. He took off the coat and sat back down with his coffee. At noon, Michael and Emily arrived together. Emily had flown in from Seattle the week before and hadn't left yet. "Dad," Emily said, hugging him tight. "We were so worried." "I'm okay," Frank said. "Come in. Sit down. I need to tell you something." They sat around the kitchen table, and Frank told them everything. About how Sarah had forgotten him. About how it hurt her to see him. About how he decided to watch from the bus instead. About 12 years of riding to the end of the line just to make sure she was okay. Every single day. Michael asked, his voice tight. "Every single day." Emily was crying openly. "Dad, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And the saddest. It's what she would have done for me," Frank said simply. "It's what she did do for me when I came back from the war and couldn't sleep through the night. She showed up. Every night she was there. So I showed up for her." Michael wiped his eyes. "I wish we'd known. We could have helped. You did help. You checked on me. You made sure I wasn't completely alone. That was enough." They sat together for a long time, sharing memories of Sarah, laughing at some, crying at others. "There's one more thing," Frank said. "I want to keep riding the bus." "Dad, you don't have to do that anymore," Emily said gently. "I know. But that's become my routine. My way of starting the day. And Marcus, the driver, he's been part of this journey too, even if he didn't know it. I'd like to keep riding, but maybe not to the end of the line anymore." "Where will you get off?" Michael asked. Frank thought about it. "My stop. Oakwood Avenue. Time to come home." The next morning, Frank walked to the bus stop at 9:10 a.m. At 9:15, the Route 47 pulled up. "Morning, Frank," Marcus said. "Morning, Marcus." Frank climbed on, tapped his card, moved toward his usual seat. Then he stopped, looked at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "Marcus, can I tell you something?" "Of course, man. What's up?" "You know that assisted living facility we pass? Sunshine Meadows." "Yeah, I know it. My wife was there. In the memory care unit. Alzheimer's." Marcus's expression softened. "Oh, Frank. I'm sorry." She passed away a couple weeks ago. Man, I'm real sorry. The reason I rode to the end of the line every day, Frank continued, was to see her. Just to see her in the window. To make sure she was okay. Marcus pulled the bus over at the next stop, put it in park, turned around in his seat. You rode this bus every day for 12 years just to see your wife through a window? Yeah, that's... Marcus shook his head, his eyes wet. That's love, man. That's real love. She did the same for me once, Frank said. I was just returning the favor. They sat there for a moment, two men who'd shared a bus route for a decade, finally understanding each other completely. So where you getting off today? Marcus asked. My stop, Frank said. Oakwood. Think I'll start getting off at my stop from now on? Good plan, Marcus said. Good plan. When they reached Oakwood Avenue, Frank stood up. Thank you, Marcus. For everything. You take care of yourself, Frank. And hey, you'll still ride this route, right? In the mornings. Yeah, I'll still be here. Good. Wouldn't be the same without you. Frank stepped off the bus and walked the short block to his house. It was a different walk than the long one from the end of the line. Shorter, easier, but no less important. Epilogue showing up. Spring came. The trees along Route 47 bloomed pink and white. The flower beds at Sunshine Meadows burst with color. Frank still rode the 915 bus every morning. He'd nod to Marcus, sit in his seat, watch the world go by. When they passed Sunshine Meadows, he'd look up at the third-floor window. The room was probably occupied by someone else now. Another family story. Another person's journey. But Frank would remember. Would always remember the woman who sat there, waiting for something she couldn't name, loved by someone she couldn't remember. One morning in late April, Marcus pulled the bus over at Oakwood Avenue and turned around. Hey Frank, weird question. You busy this afternoon? Not particularly. Why? My grandson's having a birthday party. He's turning 4. And I was telling him about you, about how you rode the bus every day to look out for your wife, and he said you sounded like a superhero. Would you want to come? Meet him? No pressure, just thought I'd ask. Frank felt something warm bloom in his chest. The first real warmth he'd felt since Sarah died. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. The party was chaos and cake and little kids running everywhere. Frank sat in the backyard and told Marcus's grandson, Jaden, stories about riding the bus, about what you could see if you paid attention, about how showing up every day was its own kind of superpower. My grandpa shows up every day too, Jaden said seriously. He drives the bus even when it rains. He does, Frank agreed. That's pretty special. After the party, Marcus walked Frank to his car. Thanks for coming, man. Jaden's going to remember this. Thank you for inviting me. Frank, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think, was it worth it? All those years. Even though she didn't know you were there? Frank thought about it. Thought about 12 years of bus rides. 12 years of watching a window. 12 years of showing up for someone who couldn't remember why that mattered. Yeah, he said finally. It was worth it. Because love isn't about being remembered. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Sarah taught me that. I was just trying to live up to her example. Marcus nodded slowly. That's beautiful, man. That night, Frank sat in his chair with Sarah's journal in his lap. He'd read it so many times he had parts of it memorized. He opened to the last page, where Sarah had written about waiting for someone, about knowing she was loved even when she couldn't remember details. Frank picked up a pen. Below Sarah's last entry, in his own careful handwriting, he wrote, "I came every day, Sarah. Every single day. And I would do it all again. Love you forever. Frank." He closed the journal and set it back on the coffee table. Outside, he could hear the sound of the evening bus going by. Route 47, heading to the end of the line. Frank stood up and walked to the window. He watched the bus's taillights disappear into the distance. "Good night, Sarah," he said quietly. "See you in my dreams." And for the first time in a long time, Frank felt like he might actually get some sleep. Because he'd kept his promise. He'd shown up. And in the end, that's what love was. Not the grand gestures or the perfect words. Just showing up. Every single day. No matter what. The end. Sometimes love looks like a 50-year marriage full of conversation and laughter. Sometimes it looks like sitting by a bedside when words have run out. And sometimes, love looks like riding the same bus every single day, just to glimpse someone through a window. Frank Morrison showed up for his wife every day for 12 years. She couldn't remember his name. She couldn't remember their life together. But somewhere in the deepest part of her, she knew someone was coming. That's the power of showing up. That's the power of love that doesn't quit. Is there someone in your life who needs you to show up? Not with grand gestures or perfect words, just with your presence. Today might be a good day to start. Thank you for listening to Frank and Sarah's story. If this moved you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories like this. And in the comments, tell us who do you show up for. See you in the next story.